Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today we will be discussing the new cultural and financial war that has been waged against Israel and how we can fight back. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's special guest is all the way from North London. It's a good friend of mine and a regular and an excellent contributor to the Middle East Report. Needs no introduction, Sharon Klaff. Warm welcome to the Middle East Report. Great to see you, Sharon.
Hi, nice to be here again.
Excellent. And Sharon, do you want to share how you are? Because I think this is a very important question that Christians need to ask of our Jewish friends. How are they? How are you at this very difficult time with this rampant rise of Jew hatred that we're seeing not only in Britain but across the world? And you can't open a newspaper today without seeing 2 or 3 horrific anti-Semitic articles or news reports of something that's occurred in this country.
So I think we're at where I've always spoken to you about, which was about anti-Semitism becoming overt and Jews being attacked across the world, not just in Israel. And it feels a little bit selfish for me to talk about myself when people in Israel have been through what they're going through, been through 7/10, what happened in October, the invasion, the rape, the burning, the babies. So it seems a bit selfish to talk about myself, but what happened on the 7th of October was in a way the culmination of a build-up of launching a war against all Jews. And although we're sitting in the West and we're relatively safe from such an invasion, we're under attack. Jews certainly across the West, are being attacked physically. There was recently in Brent Street an attack on a Jew last week. There was an incident there of young school children attacking a Jewish child. And luckily, one of my friends, who's a security officer, was there and managed to stop it, call the police, and as usual, the police have done very little of anything. So the Jewish communities across the West are really, I think, suffering. You've seen it on the news. You've seen what's going on in the universities. We had a discussion some years ago about University College, 2017. When this happened, when we were chased around the campus, we were held siege there for some hours. And finally, I certainly walked out because I wasn't going to be held under siege. But the whole group of Jewish audience and the speakers stayed there for about 2 hours before the police let them out to the drumming, the Free, Free Palestine, the banging on the windows. Just the same as we're seeing now, but more intense. So I think Jews across the West Jews across the world are feeling the tension of these attacks on us as Jewish people. And what has it done? In a way, it's united the Jews in a way that they haven't been united. One of the problems with the Jewish community is fighting the Jewish community to have this truth being exposed. And finally, I think that they've realized that it's crunch time. It's time for them to stand together, to stand with Israel, to stand with the Judeo-Christian ethic of the world so that we can somehow get through this evil time. I can only call it evil.
It's very evil, and I think you described it very well. But how important is it, Sharon, that the Christians stand in solidarity with you and the rest of the community so that you don't feel that you're alone in this, that the Jew hatred that's been inflicted against you and your community is also being inflicted upon us? Because like a whole story to do with Ruth, she followed Naomi everywhere. In the same way, we're following you in the same way that Ruth followed Naomi. So it's imperative in it that the Christian community stand in solidarity with our Jewish brothers and sisters right now, particularly at this very evil and dangerous time.
Well, I refer to the Judeo-Christian ethic. And I think that's important to remember that the values of Western society come out of Judaism, comes out of the Ten Commandments that Moses gave us, and Christianity comes out of that. So in a way, there's not a rift. Christianity is not something completely different to Judaism. It's actually part of Judaism, and it's a continuation that some people follow, whereas other people like myself follow the Old Testament without the Christianity. But we're still valuing the ethics of the Judeo-Christian ethic, and that's what's given the West its civilization, its law, its morality, its ethics, its value, its principles, and that's how we can grow as a civilization and be creative. And I think it's terribly important that it's understood that this is not a Jewish problem. This is a Judeo-Christian problem, that the Christians, of course, need to stand with the Jews, and the Jews need to stand with the Christians, because it's both that are under threat. I'm not quite sure how to phrase it to you, but we have, I think I've said it before, we have the Judeo-Christian ethic, and we have then this red-green alliance, this alliance of Marxism with jihadism, with Islamic fundamentalism. And this is where the clash is coming, this clash of civilizations. And I think that's the time that Huntington, you've read Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. I think this is what he was talking about, and we seem to be there on the precipice. And now, who's going to win this battle? This is what we're facing. So we have to stand together.
No, absolutely. And of course, when we're discussing this new cultural financial war against Israel, we have to put it in context of what happened on October the 7th, as you said, the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, where over 1,200 Israelis and foreign nationals were murdered on that day, over 6,000 to 7,000 injured, many of those critical, 250 hostages taken prisoner. And this was the biggest massacre of Jewish people that we've seen for over 85 years, and that was in the Second World War and the Holocaust. But can you just unpack for us this cultural war that's now being waged against Israel? Because it almost seems that ever since October the 7th, Jew hatred has now become acceptable. It's become popular amongst young people, to the extent now that this is the number one issue that people campaign on, and it's the Palestinian cause, which frankly, when you unpack what that actually means, you're supporting violence, you're supporting terrorism, you're supporting genocide.
Okay, so I think it was Chief Rabbi Sachs who delineated the sort of passage of anti-Semitism through time, how it started right at the beginning against Jews because of their religion, and it's gone on through the time, Jews because of where they come from, where they live, and now we've come to the stage where the anti-Semitism has grown and gained adherence to the anti-Semitism cause as they've gone through each phase of anti-Semitism. And this is how they go through society. And now they've got to the phase where they've attacked Israel. They not managed to destroy Israel militarily, so they've gone for Israel in various ways. They've gone through intifada to try and go at the people and kill the people. So they built a wall and they stopped them coming in. Then they did something called the brick intifada, where they started building houses across the West Bank to bring more and more of their community in, so that they could try and infiltrate and get rid of Israel that way. And that's still ongoing. And
which is Area C, isn't it, in Israel?
Sorry?
It's Area C in Israel now, which is Israeli
Area C, which is
under the Oslo.
Yeah, which is under the Palestinian Authority. But the idea is that if they bring people into the area, they can encroach into Israel. And of course, one of the ways of encroaching is using the value system of Judaism, of the Jewish people who offer humanitarian aid and help and so on, and to use that to inveigle themselves into the hearts of the Israelis and therefore infiltrate in that way. So the culture war is the next phase of it. The culture war is where they now have come out into the greater world, and they are they've been attacking some of the big businesses for some time. We know that they've gone at Elbit, which is the Israeli security armament firm that supplies, in fact, got more more to do with the British Army than it has to the Israeli Army, because it makes night vision goggles for the British Army. It makes security systems for the British Army. So it's really an important supplier to our British Army here, who are also fighting in the Middle East against the Houthis and so on. So this cultural war against using the companies to attack Israel, in a way, is self-defeating to the survival of the United Kingdom. So Barclays Bank, they've been attacking for years. We know that. They've been attacking Starbucks for some time, and all of them have got sort of spurious grounds of attack. They haven't got any reality based in them that they support Israel.
Excellent. Also mentioning McDonald's and Google as well. And I think what you said earlier there, that the former Chief Rabbi, Jonathan Sachs, I think was one of the world's leading experts when it came to understanding Jew hatred, and how Jew hatred morphs over a period of time. So, so historically we are looking with the rise of Christianity, sadly, and the control of the Roman control of Catholicism and the Pope over Christianity. During the time of the early church, we saw a lot of anti-Israel theology emerge, which is known as church replacement theology. And of course, under the medieval times, this is where the Jewish people were attacked, of course, expelled from this country. And also this country produced the horrific Yellow Star, pushed its Jewish community into exile in the Middle Ages under Edward I, which was horrific. I think 1290, the expulsion of the Jews from England. Well, yeah. And then morphed then with the Renaissance, became scientific. The Jewish people were then racially profiled, and this is where we saw the rise of, with rise of Nazism and fascism, particularly Nazism, who adopted the whole concept of the Aryan race based on the teachings of Darwin, and that only the strongest and the fittest will survive, and the weakest creation will actually die. So they translated that into states. Only the strongest states would survive. So, of course, then we get the Holocaust, and then after the Holocaust, we have a period where anti-Semitism is extremely low because of the horrors of the Holocaust. But then we see that Israel then becomes targeted as the Jewish state on the international arena. So they're the kind of three major stages where we are now. And it almost seems as if all these things are coming into place now. And October the 7th was designed to attack Israel on a multi-front war, whether it's the actual war for Israel's survival by Hamas and Hezbollah, sponsored by the Iranians, together with the media war against Israel, then followed by the boycott, divestments and sanctions. So a boycott, divestments, sanctions movement against Israel, a cultural movement, social media war against Israel, a legal war, and of course we're now discussing this program, the cultural and financial war, where sadly we're seeing that through social media and the hatred of Israel that we see amongst Generation Z on the influence of TikTok, this is having a huge impact on the youth and making them hate Israel, making them hate the Jewish people. And of course, this is where we're seeing this explosion of Jew hatred today. Your thoughts on particularly the way that social media is mobilizing grassroots hatred against Israel, rather than in the 1930s when it was the state, particularly the Hitler and the apparatus of the state, to bring anti-Semitic pogroms on the Jewish people.
Okay, so to talk about the effect that social media has on anti-Semitism, we have to go back a little bit to this BDS that you spoke about. And when it was formed, there wasn't really any social media. I think Facebook was just starting. We're talking about early 2000s, post the Durban conference, where Zionism was declared to be racism.
About 2002 then.
So following that, BDS started 2002, 2003. By 2005, 6, 7, they were beginning to use their plan to have Israeli companies boycotted. So they started with the Ahava store in Monmouth Street in London, and they used to go there every 2 weeks and protest. There were about 50 of them.
Yeah,
It weren't a huge amount. You remember that? I'm sure you were there.
I actually went in and I met many good friends there.
That's right. I think that's where we act as activists who were realizing what was going on. We came together. That's when Campaign for Truth was started, and various other groups came there and tried to expose what was going on. But there was no social media to advertise it. The media wasn't coming there. The Jewish leadership were not interested. But we were hearing on the streets what the plan was. And the plan was to build this BDS. So we have, if we fast forward, because we've discussed the growth of BDS quite often, but if we fast forward to today, BDS is a brand. It's a brand that's probably bigger than Nike. And if you think of Nike and what it brings to the world, it brings good health, it brings exercise, it brings how to eat, it brings nourishment.
The trainers as well.
The BDS brings to the world hatred, evilness, the propagation of the lie about the blood libels of the Jews. And they use all of these strings that they've pulled together over the millennia that Rabbi Sachs was talking about to culminate in almost squeezing the Jewish people and the Jewish state, which is the epitome of the Jewish people, squeezing them into a corner. And the final rinse is this idea of getting big business to boycott Israel, because if they can hit Israel financially, so they think they can get Israel to collapse. So Israel's facing a war that's costing millions of shekels, millions of dollars. They managed to get America to hold back on some of the armaments that they're supplying. And now they're attacking the big businesses and trying to get them to pull back so that Israel can really almost be throttled. It's almost the same as what the Nazis did to individual Jews, they're doing to the Jewish community. This is the power of BDS, and it's backed by huge finance that comes out of, people talk about Soros, through the Tides Foundation. The Tides Foundation has got to do with the Heinz family. So we're talking about huge backing that's coming through for this BDS to bring into its fold the youngsters who are dealing with social media. So
global institutions, global organizations, global individuals who have a globalist agenda, combined with dangerous states like Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Qatar and others.
Red Green Alliance.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's have a look now at this excellent CBN report that wants to debunk the lies when it comes to what is Jew hatred. Have a look.
The Jewish race, is that a thing? Are Jewish people white? But Jewish people control Hollywood, right? Am I even allowed to say Jew?
Hi everyone, I'm Noah Tishby and I am a Jew.
And I'm Emmanuel Acho, and I have uncomfortable conversations.
In their new book, the co-authors of Uncomfortable Conversations with a Jew talk about seeing a problem and taking steps to address it.
Emmanuel noticed over a year before October 7th, the rise of anti-Semitism. And it was very interesting to me that somebody from outside of the Jewish community was able to detect that something is brewing. He called me and he asked me if I would like to write this book. And I literally couldn't have said yes faster.
We're called to love people, but how can you love what you don't know? I finally got to learn about my present day Jewish brothers and sisters, what breaks their heart, what makes them smile, what makes them cry. And so I can try to be a genuine ally to those that are hurting.
Noah, you are Jewish. What are some of those stereotypes that are painful, that are heartbreaking, that you wish weren't there? And how do we address them?
Wow, beautiful question. So first of all, the thing to understand is that anti-Semitism, which is anti-Jewish hate, is the oldest form of hate and discrimination that is still being practiced today. We see first accounts of anti-Semitism in 300 BC in Alexandria in Egypt. So the Jews have always been the brunt of kind of like bore the brunt of hate around the world. Anti-Semitism can look something like the Jews are the vermin of the earth and they're disgusting, like the Nazis used to say. But they also sound like, well, the Jews control the media and the Jews control the banks, which is also an anti-Semitic trope that people don't understand.
Tishby and Acho's book hit shelves just as pro-Palestinian protests spread across America's college campuses, bringing with them unprecedented levels of anti-Semitic statements and acts of violence.
And the thing to understand is this: they have been led to believe and been brainwashed to believe that Israel is actually causing a genocide on the Palestinian people, that Israel is a white colonialist state that shouldn't exist. That this has been going on for decades, so much so that now they think that anything that Israel does, and by extension, anything the Jews do, is wrong and needs to be dismantled. I am not discrediting Palestinian pain in any way, shape, or form. And being critical of Israeli government's policies is completely legitimate. This is not what we're seeing on campuses today. We're seeing gas the Jews. We're seeing such hate that is the result of decades of intentional poisoning, and we need to be very careful where this can lead.
Tishby, an Israeli activist and actress, recently tried to reason with anti-Israel protesters at the Sundance Film Festival, finding that most did not have their facts straight.
From the river to the sea, Palestine needs to be free from the occupation, which is illegal.
What's the river?
I forgot the river's name,
sea?
but the sea is the Red Sea.
The Palestinian genocide, it's just awful.
What about the hostages? Do you know about the hostages?
Unfortunately, I'm not that educated about that part.
She fears what we've seen on college campuses comes dangerously close to jihadism.
So if you support jihadism, if you support that political arm of Islam as it manifests in Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas and ISIS and all the rest, then you're not on the side of history that supports democracy and liberties and everything we hold dear.
Acho, a former NFL linebacker and Fox Sports analyst, hopes their book will be an antidote that can possibly turn hatred to hope and even love.
First and foremost, I would hope for knowledge. I loved pursuing this book as a Christian man and the son of a pastor because of my affinity and intrigue by and for the Jewish community, right? When you read the Bible, you read about the Jews, you read about Jesus born in a manger, you read about Nazareth, you read about Bethlehem, but you kind of leave it in the Bible. And you don't remember that modern day there are Jews walking amongst you that are suffering.
And Noah, again, the stereotypes, what bugs you? What stereotype do you just think is ridiculous, or what stereotype is true?
I think the Jewish mama might be a real one, because I am one, and and all the cliches. I'm like, yeah, I'm very much like that. I really think my son can do no wrong. That's not true. He definitely can. So that that one might be a bit real. But I loved the chapter about the Jewish stereotypes. We just let it all out, asking everything about money, about power, about being cheap, about all these things that to me are extraordinary, again, because when you come from a place of love and authenticity and faith and connectivity, nobody gets triggered, nobody gets upset, nobody gets hurt. You listen and you exchange ideas, and it was just a beautiful thing.
Despite the growing anti-Semitism, Tishby says she chooses to live wisely and not fearfully, adding that being Jewish is more than her faith. It's a very special way of life.
Even the basic thing of a Shabbat dinner, right? Every Friday night, whether you're secular or religious or traditional, whatever, most Jews will mark the night. So you sit around with your family and you don't have mundane conversations, and you do kind of this ritual that you've done for thousands of years, and it gives an anchor to the family that is pretty positive. Yeah. So there's some things about the Jewish way of life. This obsession with education is something that worked out throughout the years, right? So everything that we do is all out there. There's nothing secretive about being Jewish.
Wendy Griffith, CBN News.
Excellent news report there, breaking down the myths and the stereotypes against Jewish people, and making people understand who the Jewish people are, which is so important. Sharon, I have to kind of ask you that really this Jew hatred that we're seeing and this war against Israel, which is also a war against the Jewish people that's being waged as well, has absolutely intensified since the horrors of October the 7th. And of course, what we've seen is that this has penetrated culture, mainstream culture. And prior to October the 7th, we had a horrific music artists, the likes of Kanye West and also Wiley, who's a grime artist, coming out with the most horrific anti-Semitic tropes, and yet now we're seeing their influence is pretty much by the Black Hebrew movement. Share with us the challenge that Israel faces now culturally with music artists holding deeply disturbing anti-Semitic views and anti-Israel views, to the extent now where they want to try and cancel Israel and cancel companies that do business with Israel.
I think where the artists come in is not so much of whether they go to Israel and support Israel or not in taking their music to Israel, in having concerts in Israel. I think where they come in is that a lot of them have big audiences. And if they propagate this anti-Israel, I call it Palestinianism, where Palestinianism is the weapon that they use to attack the Jews. It's not really about Palestinians. They don't really care much about the people. Sure. So they use this as a weapon. And if they propagate this Palestinianism, it gets to the youth, it gets to the young people, the people you see on TikTok, on Instagram, mostly those two. It gets to them and gives them false information. I hate to use the word lies, but it actually is lies. They're feeding them a false impression of what Jews are. Remember, a lot of these people, these youngsters, have never met a Jew. They don't all live in big metropolitan cities where they come across a synagogue and a Jewish community. Let's remember that in the entire world, there are probably something like, how many Jews in the world? 15 million? Something like that. There are 8 million in Israel. There are roughly the same amount in America.
12 million in the States.
In the States, and then scattered around the world. So we're talking 15, 16, 17 million Jews in the whole world. And how many billions of people?
And Israel's population is nearly 10 million.
Nearly 10 million. So the rest of them are mostly Muslims, some Christians, not a lot of Christians. So what we're looking at is this whole idea of the Jewish people being blown up as being this huge community that controls the world with huge amounts of people, but they're not.
Yeah, but I have to take a point now. I just want to emphasize a point you made, that if the Jewish people are controlling the world, if they are controlling the media, then why does Israel have such a negative PR when it comes to the media coverage of Israel? Why is it that the Jewish community is under siege? And it clearly shows that this is, the foundation of this is nothing but lies and heresy.
Look, if the Jews were really controlling the world, Biden wouldn't be withholding arms from Israel. For first, Biden would be giving the Jews whatever they want if they were controlling the American government, which the BDS and its broader community claims to happen. If the Jews were controlling the banks, would we be having this issue with Barclays and withdrawing from music festivals and so on? If they were controlling commerce, would we have this thing with Puma? Would we have this thing with Coca-Cola? You know, we would just slam it and say, go away because we control you. We'll pull the purse strings and so you do what we want. So it's a load of baloney that the Jews are controlling the whole world. It's almost impossible. The way the Jews, in a sense, control the world, if you want to call it control, is that the Jews have innovation that helps the world enormously. So in that way, it provides the world with security, it provides the world with medications, it supplies the world with technology, the technology they're using against the Jews. It supplies the world with all of these things. Israel is the first to take field hospitals across the world when there are catastrophes. For instance, it's not known that Israel has put field hospitals in Gaza. I guess you haven't heard that either. There are field hospitals operating in Gaza that's helping the so-called civilians, these civilians who are being paid to look after the hostages and keep them holed up in apartments in tunnels. They're being paid a daily rate of, I think, something like $15 a day. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
This is what's going on. So if the Jews controlled everything, heck, they're so bad at it. They really are bad at it.
Yeah, which leads to another kind of point on this one, particularly the influence that musicians are having. Now, if musicians and artists are using their music platform to boycott Israel because of their supporters on social media are being fed this toxic video feeds that are anti-Israel, Palestinian cause, which when we talk about the pro-Palestinian cause, I think essentially we have to say it's a pro-Hamas cause of violence and genocide. And they don't know what they're getting involved in, but the pressure then from their social media supporters and followers means that when it comes to music festivals, particularly with the case with Barclays Bank having to now been under huge pressure from music artists themselves not to sponsor any major summer festivals, certainly one called Latitude this summer, really does show that they are having huge influence over corporations that are associated with Israel. And then of course then we're seeing the BDS being deployed in a way that's never been deployed before. The cancelling of major corporations for their association and ties with Israel.
So there's something that puzzles me about this idea that Barclays Bank is withdrawing from sponsoring, because they're not supporting, they're sponsoring, which means they're giving money to these music festivals. So if they're saying that Barclays Bank has to withdraw and Barclays Bank withdraws from the music festivals, who's sponsoring the music festival? It has to get money from somewhere.
They obviously want other sponsors, don't they?
So this is the question, that what they're saying to Barclays Bank is, keep your money, we don't want your money. So Barclays Bank can take the cash and do something else with it. Who's sponsoring these music festivals? Who's creating an environment in which young people not only are watching on social media, but they're now going to music festivals that are being sponsored, I would wager, by the people who sponsor BDS. I would wager that the money is being replaced. I have no evidence of it, but that seems the logic to me, because why would they go to another company and then get rid of that company because it's got some association with Israel? So if these music festivals are now being sponsored by the people that they need the money from so that they can use the propaganda to influence all of those people at the festival, to give them, feed them all this, the blood libels, feed them the anti-Israel invective, feed them the anti-Semitism. This is actually quite catastrophic, and for Barclays Bank to concede it, to in a way crawl out of it with its tail between its legs, rather than standing up and saying, okay, you don't want my money, but I'm going to make a statement. We support Israel. Why do we support Israel? Because we don't support propaganda. We don't support this red-green alliance. We don't support Hamas. We don't support Iran. So we're going to stand up and say, yes, we stand with Israel. We stand against the vile attack, the medieval bestiality attacks that they perpetrated on people. We stand with them. We stand with the women, where the U2 movement don't stand with the women, where women in the United Nations don't stand with Jewish women who were raped. So for Barclays Bank just to scuttle out of there and say, okay, we'll leave, because I find it quite abhorrent. And I personally will be rethinking what I'm doing with my Barclays Bank account.
I mean, I think that where this is so dangerous, I think, Sharon, is the fact that music artists themselves have put pressure on the organisers of these music festivals to put pressure on Barclays to say, look, we don't need their sponsorship, stop sponsoring our music festivals, because of the association that Barclays helps to fund a tiny section of Israel's kind of military finances and Israel's war against a genocidal terrorist organisation, Hamas, in Gaza. And it's probably tiny amounts. We're talking about the BA systems, Rolls-Royce engines, money that goes towards drones that are British companies that are supplying tiny element of Israel's military capabilities, which most of the stuff comes from the States anyway. So this doesn't make, this is the dangerous new element, isn't it? The fact that music artists are now putting pressure on the organisers of these music festivals and concerts to cancel big global companies or British companies that are associated with Israel in some way.
But none of it makes sense, except the idea that the music artists have bought into the propaganda. Most of them don't actually know what they're talking about.
Of course.
If you look at Roger Waters, I mean, Roger Waters is an inveterate anti-Semite.
Pink Floyd, yeah.
He's just an inveterate anti-Semite. Even his fellow artists in Pink Floyd actually stand against him, have outed him for being an anti-Semite. He was probably born that way.
He wears Nazi uniforms in his concert.
Exactly, and he's got this pig and the Magen David and so on the pig and all the rest. He's an inveterate anti-Semite, and we've been trying to out him. Nobody can out him, and who cares if he's an anti-Semite, except for what it does is it influences the other artists to buy what he's selling, but they don't understand it. They don't actually get what they're doing. They're just going with the crowd. Yep. And what is required now is the brave individual to stand up with morals and values and ethics. And if there's any more evidence they need of why they should stand up, they need to go and see that 47-minute film documentary that Israel is showing to journalists. They need to go and see it. I've seen bits of them, and the abhorrence of what they did to people.
Yeah, I've seen all.
So, and you've seen it, so you know what it's about. They need to watch that. They need to not listen to people like Roger Waters and just take the easy route out.
Yeah. I mean, he's probably have an influence over your generation, but what the danger is now, particularly the influence of what is known as Black Hebrew theology, is having the influence on the likes of Kanye West and other kind of
and the hip hop
and grime music.
Yeah.
That's where most Generation Z type of music they're actually listening to. So it's having a profound impact on them. I mean, Kanye West, for example, is even his latest album has introduced a song with extremely anti-Semitic lyrics in it. Yeah. And his hatred of the Jews, they control the world, Hitler did a good thing. I mean, this is ignorance on a level that is just incomprehensible. But the fact is that they have millions of followers on whether it's Instagram, whether it's Twitter or TikTok, and they buy into the individual, they buy into the brand, and therefore they then consume the ideology of the brand or the singer or the artist, and that is what's so dangerous in indoctrinating and young people with so much hatred towards Israel and the Jewish people that then Jew hatred then becomes normal. It becomes acceptable. And the last time we saw this was in the 1930s with the rise of Nazism, where the Nazis took over the complete apparatus of the state in Germany. But the difference this time, it's coming up from the grassroots through social media. It's influencing people on the ground. It's not governments that are apart from the Islamic governments like Iran, Qatar and others, and the Middle East. But this is literally coming from grassroots movement that is producing this Jew hatred, that's putting pressure on governments, it's putting pressure on companies, and it's coming up from the ground. This is what makes this so dangerous, and also that music artists are bought into this lie, and it's complete role reversal. The real genocide that took place was against Israel on October the 7th, and not in Hamas. So share with us how Jew hatred has now penetrated our popular culture, and this is what I think is so dangerous.
So if we go back to the World War II, where you spoke about Nazism and what happened to the Jews, we all know that. We all know what happened in the camps, and 6 million Jews and God knows 60, 70 million people across the world being killed because of that. Directly after that, way into the 50s and early 60s, we kind of felt that anti-Semitism had died in the Holocaust, because it became unacceptable for anti-Semites to be overt about their anti-Semitism. We didn't realize that. I grew up thinking there was a bit of anti-Semitism around. Sort of in South Africa, there was playful anti-Semitism about, you Jews know everything, why don't you organize the parties, you've got the money to pay for the parties. That sort of anti-Semitism. But it was that was accepted as day-to-day living. But the idea that people could be overtly anti-Semitic and propagate against a community the way they're propagating against Jews today actually didn't exist then. And it started coming back sort of early 60s. And it's not a coincidence that in 1964, the idea of a Palestinian people was started by the KGB and Yasser Arafat. Before that, Palestinians had been Jews, not Arabs.
Absolutely.
So that's not a coincidence. So if we fast forward now, what has happened? We've got this idea of Islamic anti-Semitism, which is overt, and propagated the October the 7th, and it's given a bravado to the latent anti-Semites to become overt. And so they're now speaking about it. They're out there, they're walking around just talking about Jews, pushing Jews over, literally, in the streets. It's given them a bravado to be anti-Semitic, to express who they are. They can now finally come out, almost as gays came out of the closet, anti-Semites have come out. And they're now pushing this around quite comfortably, ignoring what happened in 7/10. I can't go back enough to how they don't talk about what happened on 7/10. They talk about what happened on 8/10 going forward. That they ignore completely the rape and the violence. It's for me, that is the biggest sort of defilement of mankind.
Exactly, because we've lost the West has lost
its
moral
it completely.
compass. Western society's become decadent. It's become so militantly secular that we have no concept of right and wrong anymore. We don't know what evil is, and what we see, particularly in the likes of supporting the whole Palestinian cause, is that the evil has become good and good has become evil.
And it takes away boundaries. It takes away the boundaries from these youngsters who just today, I heard on the news, coming over here, had put orange paint all over Stonehenge. Now, if you think of that's an ancient monument, it survived millennia, and they're busy spraying it with some sort of toxic material to destroy it. It's taken away their bravado. It's taken away any sort of reins that they've had on being useful citizens, to do what they want. King Charles's portrait, look what they did to his portrait. So, and it's taken away the idea of them to have some sort of caring for fellow beings, regardless of your ethnicity. They talk about it. They come along with this idea of equity and diversity and inclusion, but they're not actually including people who don't agree with them. Yep. And mostly the Jews don't agree with them, because the Jews believe in a God, they believe in a nation state, they have a family, they believe in the nuclear family. They are the antithesis to what these youngsters have been brought up to.
Yeah, which is social Marxism, and the influence of social Marxism, and also the attacks as well on Barclays Banks itself. So we see that, for example, that the music organisers and the music artists wanted to cancel sponsorship of the very big high-profile music festivals, and of course there we see the attacks on Barclays branches that were ones in Bristol, and there's a few others, and completely vandalising them. I mean, it's almost. I mean, where does this stop? Either our government, and of course we're in the midst of a general election, so we don't actually know who will form our next government on, was it Thursday the 4th of July. But seriously, whatever government wins the next general election, they've got to deal with this. Otherwise we've got like social anarchy on our streets, and you know, the spraying of red blood and everything else. I mean, that is really tainting the Barclays brand. And of course, because they say you associate with Israel, they then find out that many of their customers don't want to bank with Barclays, because it's seen as, you know, woke and supporting Israel, and so therefore that reason people are like, I'm going to pull my money out, I'm not going to invest in Barclays. The brand becomes diminished, and then its profit margins suffer. So we can see this is actually a deliberate attempt to attack any major brands, whether it's Barclays, whether it's Starbucks, McDonalds or Google, that are associated with Israel in any way.
And what you see there with Barclays Bank and the red paint, what is not shown is how a few weeks ago, when there was a protest outside the Ministry of Defence in the West End, they threw red paint on the building, the Ministry of Defence building. Now that's attack on our army.
Yep.
And our army did nothing. The police did nothing. They marched in like tin soldiers. They stood and looked. They didn't arrest anybody, and they did nothing about it. So what we're faced with is, when you ask the question, where does it end? It can only end when a responsible government takes action against the irresponsibility of the people perpetrating these acts on property, on people, on religious institutions, on our education system. I mean, it is so enormous that it's completely infiltrated the whole of society. And hopefully with this election, that somewhere, I don't know where they're going to find it, because I'm not sure who anybody's going to vote for, but out of it needs to come a responsible government, a government that are the adults in the room, because there seem to be no adults around anymore. The children are playing and they're being allowed to play.
Yeah, there's no characters.
That's really what it comes down to.
That's for sure. But also share with us, for example, the hypocrisy of Barclays. So, we're seeing here that according to the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, according to the Palestinian supporters who say that Barclays Bank is providing the finances for Israel to buy military hardware, mainly from BAE Systems and Rolls-Royce engines and others, that effectively this is being used in weapons against the Palestinians in Gaza, and therefore this is why we need to boycott Barclays. But Barclays itself was the first bank in 2014 under David Cameron to introduce Sharia banking. And many members of the European Parliament have raised serious questions to the European Commission about how Sharia financing has helped fund Islamist terrorist attacks. So again, this is kind of confusing state. They are attacking a bank that is pro-Islamic Sharia financing, supports Israel a little bit, but at the same time, it just shows complete hypocrisy, doesn't it?
Well, this is David Cameron, from what I remember, I haven't researched it recently, but from what I remember, David Cameron made a big speech about Sharia banking, and I think Barclays Bank was the first bank that he made the speech about. Yeah. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. So Sharia banking is a kind of banking that they've devised that obviates the necessity to charge interest, because Muslims are not allowed to pay and be charged interest on loans. So I'm not quite sure how it works, but I from what I understand is that they calculate the price of something with the interest in it, and then they sell it as a whole product to somebody. So if you're buying a house, they would do all the calculations with all the mortgage interests and that, price the house, and the bank would sell the guy the house, and he would just pay a fixed sum every month to pay off what is ostensibly the value of the house, including the interest. But that's another bit of hypocrisy that you get around. So this is how they've got around the fact that we don't pay interest on our loans. But Barclays Bank, this is what I said earlier on, the sort of confusion about this involvement of Barclays Bank, where they say that Barclays Bank is financing arms that are killing Palestinians. The whole of the UK provides Israel with, I think, 1% of its armaments or its security purchases. How much of that is Barclays Bank? 0.2%? I don't know. Can't be the whole amount, surely. So this involvement of Barclays is just a red herring to try and collapse big companies so that they can use it against Israel. Yep. But I find it confusing because I don't understand how they can use it against Israel, because Barclays Bank has, as I said, left the room with its tail between its legs. It hasn't stood up for anything.
No, which is tragic.
So Barclays Bank, for me, what can I say?
But also share for the other story that you told me, another global brand, which is Coca-Cola. So we should get some revenue from the amount of companies that we're mentioning on this program today, Sharon. But I mean, for example, Coca-Cola are currently sponsoring Euro 24 in Germany. But share with us the story about how they essentially read an article just before in the research that they are now being targeted by the BDS movement, that their sales globally are down by 23%. Because of ever since October the 7th, and then a month later Israel launched its war against Hamas in Gaza. So we're seeing again the Coca-Cola, the brand, being associated with Israel, so therefore the Islamic world says we're not going to drink Coca-Cola or buy Coca-Cola. So share with us another way, or these brands that work with Israel and sell products to Israel are being targeted, and also the horrific story of the survivor of the Nova Music Festival, who was held captive by Hamas against her will for 245 days, was drinking a Coke with her father, and now the Islamic community worldwide wants to boycott Coca-Cola because the hostage who was freed in that incredible military operation by the IDF was drinking a can of Coke with the father. I mean, you can't write this script.
So you couldn't make this up. So here we have a young girl who was taken hostage. Everybody remembers that picture of her on the motorbike and calling for her boyfriend. And it still makes me cry when I think about it. That was Noah Argamani. So she was taken hostage for 240 something days. She was held in an apartment, I understand held by an Al Jazeera journalist and his father, a doctor father, and she was rescued. And two things happened. The one was, she said the first time she heard Hebrew, she was so excited because she hadn't heard Hebrew all the time she was held hostage. That was the first thing. And you can imagine how that released in her a whole pile of emotions. And then there was this picture of her sitting with her father in the hospital, and the two of them were having a bottle of Coke. And you can imagine as well, there she's held hostage, starved. All this aid that's been coming into Gaza wasn't fed to the hostages, so she's been starved. She's probably half her weight. And imagine having this cool Coke, and this is how Coke advertises, don't they? With the bubbles and the ice, have a cool Coke, refresh yourself. And Coca-Cola also being the organization that was that very famous song about One World.
Oh yeah, for the 2010 World Cup.
Bringing the world together, and you had every ethnicity singing there about harmony and etc., etc. So this is Coca-Cola. And so of course they jumped on it, this BDS anti-Israel group. They jumped on it and said, oh, Coca-Cola, we've got to ban Coca-Cola, it's sold in Israel. Look, she's a Jewish woman drinking Coca-Cola. So I read yesterday that Coca-Cola produced an advert in Bangladesh, and they used the most esteemed actors in it, and they were in the store, and the store owner was extolling the virtue of this man to drink a Coca-Cola. And so then it came out with the story of Israel selling Coke and how dare they do it, and Coca-Cola also then tried to backtrack on it and lost sales.
Yeah.
Just like Barclays Bank.
Which is obviously shows how much they're being targeted as well. But we've got a few minutes left, and we also have to discuss the cost of Israel's war against the genocidal terrorist organisation Hamas in Gaza. I mean, according to kind of latest figures here, the cost is in the region of something like $250 billion US. It cost Israel since it launched its military operation into Gaza, with a loss of something like 5% of its GDP. So I mean, Israel is suffering financially. I mean, it's a rich and wealthy country, but now its resources are being drained. And according to the Times of Israel, this war is costing Israel £263 million a day, or the equivalent of 1 billion shekels. Israel can't sustain that for an extended period of time, having to draft soldiers out of their businesses not making as much money as they were before because they're concentrating on security. And yet this is a war that Israel doesn't want to engage in but has to. Just share with us the huge financial cost of this war and the financial and economic toll that's taking on Israel.
Okay, so and I don't think there's a family in Israel who's unaffected by financially about this. Israel operates on a dual system army. So you've got your permanent force and then you've got your reservists. And as you saw, there was over 130% call up or arrival of the reservists in the army. That means that all of these people have left their jobs or their studies to come and serve in order to save their country, to save their people. So obviously, I mean, it's logical that there's going to be huge financial losses there. Imagine a chap who owns a sweet shop, suddenly his doors are closed, sweets are going off, he can't sell his sweets, and he's in the army for how long? He doesn't even know how long. So every part of Israeli society is being affected by this. not only financially in that way, it's been affected because there's a northern corridor there where the citizens, Jews, Arabs, whoever lived up there, have been evacuated to the south to save their lives, basically.
Isn't that in the region of between 80,000 and 100,000?
Something like 100,000. Something like 100,000 people have been drawn south from the northern border in order to keep them alive, basically. So they're living in hotels, their families sharing hotel rooms, their families have been put up in spare apartments that somebody might own. People have got together and furnished them, given them couches and beds and so on. This is the kind of community that's come together to help them. Coupled with that, we've lost how many kibbutzim and villages down south have been burnt and destroyed completely. So people there have lost homes. They're paying mortgages on homes that don't exist anymore. So, and they're not working, and they're living, some people have been shipped down to Eilat, living in hotels. Some people are living just everywhere. I believe the hotels are full of people using as homes.
I've met them in Jerusalem.
So the cost is more than that. The cost is a social cost as well. The cost is kids who are out of their school environment. Sometimes there are no schools for them to go to. There are people getting depressed because they can't earn a living. There are people who are coming back from the war, minus legs, minus all sorts of things. The cost is huge on the whole of the country.
Which is the last question. How can we fight back against this cultural and financial war that's being waged against Israel? So we've got 2 minutes left of the program.
Okay, so the Jewish community have rallied. I understand that people are buying Israel bonds, and I would recommend that you do that. That raises millions and millions of dollars for Israel. And as always, I remember when I was a child how we raised money for the 48 war. My parents raised money simply by putting coins in a box and giving that box to the charities. So whatever you've got, if you've got £5, if you've got £10, go to Israel Bonds, go to JNF, go to those organizations that are collecting money and sending it. The other way, if anybody wants to contact me, I've got people that they can donate money to who will buy things like we bought a drone for soldiers and it actually saved lives the very next day. So contact me, contact Simon, contact you and be in touch so that we can do that. Just come together and do whatever you can to help sustain Israel.
Sharon, superb to have you back on the Middle East Report. Thank you for a wonderful contribution. Thank you. And I want to thank you for watching this program at home. What is new is this cultural and financial war has escalated against Israel to the extent now that music artists are calling upon organisers of music festivals to cancel their sponsors because of their association with Israel. We're seeing Barclays Bank being sprayed with and damaged and destroyed by arsonists covered in blood who say that they are supportive of the Palestinian cause. We see that Israel is in great financial trouble, and it's important that we can counter this by buying Israeli goods and supporting Israel at this vital time. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.